Hello, welcome to McGowan Soundworks. My name is Phil McGowan. I'm a mixing and recording engineer based in Los Angeles, California. And today we're going to be going over the mix for Karate War from episode 610 of Cobra Kai. There's a huge epic fight going on between Miyagi-Do and some Russians. So yeah, the cue is originally called Miyagi-Do's Vidanya in my session. So you'll see that as the session title, but on the soundtrack album, it's called Karate War. Since we're mixing some karate and it happens to be the evening, I'm drinking some Suntory Old, one of my favorite whiskeys from Japan. So, kanpai, let's mix. Okay, so here's the session. I have everything turned off and muted with plugins disabled or bypassed for us to start. So first off is the strings here. At the top, I guess I could mention, these are my VCAs for all of the orchestra layers, all the multi-tracks of orchestra. So they lay out, I usually scroll my controller here so that they're all kind of right in front of me and I can do any global automation on all the orchestra layers. So that's what's there. Everything kind of has, some automation on it. This cue looks like 3 passes of strings and a woodwind overdub. So decent amount of overdubbing on the orchestra here. And we will start with the strings. So here's just the raw strings from Budapest. So definitely need some brightening up, some zhuzhing, as it were. So starting with the room mics here. Let me fix all of that. Here's what those sound like on their own. A little ambient, could use a little more space, I suppose. And then starting with EQs, I like the Neve 80RS on my room mics. I figure many phenomenal scores have been mixed on this console back in the day, so I like to use the plugin just because the EQ is very musical, and I like it. So just a little mid-range clarity. I think I usually only use the 2 bands, and I use the older version on everything but the tree, just because I only have so much UAD. I have 2 octo cards in this computer, and these are not yet native, so that's why I'm using those. They're just kind of carving out some mid-range just to get a little more clarity on all of these microphones. So here's without. And in. So not an incredible amount of EQ, but just a little more mid-range clarity is what I try to get there. And then all the close mics. So this is usually winds along with strings. I'm not sure if they ever played together here because, we have this overdub. So I think this is mostly just strings, but here's the spot microphones and what they sound like. We'll go in the middle of the cue, see if there's some more different material here. Now, spot mics, I don't usually do a ton of EQ on. Usually it's just filtering, maybe cutting a little bit of mid-range. So if we turn on all these EQs, it looks like pretty much just filtering. Looks like bassoons, I cut a little bit of mid-range. And then filtered out some high end here. Same with contrabasses, just so I can get a little more warmth out of the contrabasses without getting too much rosiny string, since the mics on contrabasses are usually pretty close to the instrument. So that's what I did on those. That's just probably not a huge difference. Yeah, most of that's just filtering for sort of making sure there's no extra low end that we don't need. Let me see if there's any woodwinds in here. No, it's just strings. Well, I was working fast when I did this cue, so I suppose I will just kill the woodwinds here. Normally I would have done that. I'm not sure why I didn't in the original mix, but this is just strings. So here's with the room mics added in to that. So that's the overall string mix there. There is harp in the ISO booth here. You might have heard there. pan on the left. Harp left or right, it kind of can go either way. I'm used to having it on the left. I mean, it's in the ISO booth, so I can pan anywhere. But when I set harp up in the room with the strings when I'm recording, I like them on the left. Or if you're really fancy, you get 2 harps, 1 on each side. That's a nice vibe. Anyhow, so yeah, there's some reverbs that I'll add in a second here, but I figure we should probably get my bus processing going on in here. I do use master faders, as you've seen here. Some people are confused by that because the master fader is pre-dynamics, but I don't really use the faders for levels. I just do a big fade out at the end after reverbs are wrung out, just so that everything is nice and clean for the print. So I don't worry about that. But yeah, not too much on the orchestra here. Just a little Pro Q. I mean, it is a pretty extreme EQ just to kind of clear up the Budapest room's a little bit kind of a little muffly sounding for my taste, and with everything else going on, there's a lot of low-end elements in Cobra Kai action music with basses and synths and drums and all that. Yeah, so this looks extreme, but I mean, I think it sounds nice. So yeah, there's that EQ. Then there's this is just a sort of color EQ. I use this 31102 pretty much all the time on strings, brass, all sorts of things. Just a little air up here, just to give it a little bit of that nice sizzle. And it looks like I cut some 1.6 and just a tiny little boost at 60. So just a gentle, happy face, just makes it sound a little nicer. And then I'm giving you a little overall level here, just to bring the strings up with everything else. And then the Pro Q here. This low end one, this is basically just suppressing low mids when they get really heavy and high mids. So sometimes if you have violins, playing very loudly on a high line or in the brass, I do the same thing. If horns or trumpets are playing really loud, sometimes it gets a little strident, it gets a little painful in sort of the mid range frequency that can kind of hurt. So instead of dulling everything globally, I prefer to use a multi-band compressor to kind of suppress that. So yeah, I'll play some strings here and add in those overall EQs. So in isolation, that low end might sound nice, but in the whole mix, it's a little more balanced to not have the bass is quite as heavy. And that adds a little sizzle. And you can see there as the violins were getting loud in those last couple of bars there, this was doing its job. Yeah, so that's the overall string processing that I did. Looks like I also did some spot mic automation here. A little more contrabasses here. Actually, I think the note was to have less contrabasses at the beginning of the cue, so I turned them down, and then they're where they normally are the rest of the cue. And then violin spots, you can kind of see at the beginning here. They're usually kept pretty low. I had seconds up here because they were playing short notes. I usually only use a lot of violin spots if they're playing short, staccato or pizzicato notes, just to kind of give them a little more definition. So I automate those up when they're playing that way. So yeah, let me add reverbs back in, actually. And I might as well do that for everything. There's those. Yeah, and let's see what that all sounds like. We'll go, I don't know, see what these bars sound like. So reverbs, I think on this cue, all I use are my lexicons and this Altiverb. So these are two outboard lexicons that you see. You can maybe see them back there. They're PCM 96s, both set to some form of medium random hall 3, I think, on this one. I have a longer and a shorter one, so I go in and automate. Let's see if we can see the sends here. Yes, I did do this. So when the strings are playing long, and this one actually, I didn't use that. The whole cue is all short strings, so never mind. But here, yeah, the long string, the short string reverb is used the entire time. It's at like -8 on the sends, and I just send across the whole thing. Sometimes I might turn up spot mic sends if I want a little more space on a certain section, but not usually. And then the Altiverb, That one's at -3, or so -6 actually. Wow, I thought it was -3. Shows what I know about my own mixing. Anyway, so that's at -6. I think probably because when I have this many passes of orchestra, sometimes the input of the altiverb can be a little bit built up. But just adding Tadeo, it just adds a little space to things. The room in Budapest isn't super huge, so this kind of adds, just without sounding like overt reverb that people would usually identify as reverb. This kind of just adds a little extra space and depth to things. So yeah, here I'll just play and keep those muted for at first, if my computer will behave. Come on now. There we go. Yeah, let's see what those sound like. So you can hear pretty short decay. Nothing really crazy. Let me add the lexicon as well. So that sounds much more like reverb as you would probably usually identify it as. So yeah, that's the strings. We'll add in these other layers here. And then woodwinds, it's a very similar kind of idea. Let me turn the plugins on for that. All of the settings on all the passes are typically the same. Excuse me. Except sometimes I might filter out if it's an overdub of just violins. I have these Oxford filters here. They're already kind of set up to go and just grab, and there's a group for the room mics already kind of set up here. So if there was only high-end material here, I could just grab one of these and it would filter out the low end on all the room mics. Low end is not too bad in that room. I don't find there's too much rumble. Certain stages and studios around the world have a little bit more low-end rumble that sometimes I have to kind of deal with. But here's a little taste of woodwinds. And then the whole thing. Yeah, so woodwinds are sitting back where they normally would be. Woodwinds aren't typically going to, in a live setting at least, going to be that much louder than strings. So it's kind of how they're balanced here. I think, what do we do here? Yeah. So that was an important string line. They just overdubbed it for me. So I had that separate. I'm actually not sure why they put these on two separate passes here. They could have been together. Oh, because there's woodwinds in here. Huh. So that's a common thing we do in these big action cues. If there's a really big melodic line that the Zach and Leo want me to have control over, they might overdub it during the scoring session so that I can really have control over the level of it. In this case, really getting it to cut through in the mix. So that's what that overdub there is for. Yeah. That covers strings and brass. Let me zoom this in properly. Sorry, strings and winds. Let's move on to the brass. Just two passes on brass here. Nothing super crazy. I'm guessing. Looks like this is sometimes horn overdub, sometimes low brass, but mostly horns. That's also very common in Cobra Kai action cues to have the horns overdubbed because they usually have kind of big epic lines that they play. So let me give it a little taste of brass. So, similar thing here. It's in the same room. The room mics are exactly the same. That's how I would record orchestra as well. Usually set up the room mics, and then you just have the different players in different parts of the room. So here's just the room mics, and I will add the reverbs back in. EQs. So similar thing to the strings, just, kind of clearing up some mid-range. If we wanted to look at a couple of those, yeah, they're just sort of, they actually might be the exact same settings, maybe just a little bit less of the upper mids going on, just because brass can get a little strident there. But I usually start with the fullest orchestra pass when I'm mixing overdubbed or striped orchestra like this. Then I copy all the room mic settings and tweak them as need be, with the idea that theoretically these room mics could be recording all of the sections. So I try to usually keep them the same as if they were all recorded together at the same time. but there's no rules. So there's that. That's the room mics for the brass. Let's take a listen to these spot microphones. Here's what those sound like without any filtering. Yeah, so not too inspiring. Spot mics are definitely there for definition. Try to get things to, just kind of poke through the mix a little bit more. But since they're so close to the instrument, you don't have that room really, in an orchestra setting. For scores, you really want that kind of room to sing through. Same thing. So with EQs here, looks like probably just mostly filtering. Yep, mostly filtering. Trombones, I do roll off high end like this sometimes because I want to get more level out of them and definition. Usually I want a little more of the fundamental of their notes, and sometimes with the mics being so close to the bell, they can get a little bit sizzly sounding, so I just roll off some high end here. It's not super extreme, but it's, definitely doing something. And then tuba, little low ender. I don't know, when tuba's playing, I like to feel it. I like to have, some gravitas and weight to that. So yeah, I just inserted a low ender, and yeah, it looks like, I don't know, what is that, 35% blend, something like that. But yeah, here's I'll add in the room mics with the spot mics and see what that sounds like. So the room mics make quite a big difference to that, and that's where those are. Now, as far as buses go, not as much needed in the low end, just because the strings is usually where we really have that kind of low end buildup, but decent little kind of carving of the mid-range. Upper mids definitely we're getting a little bit strident and painful with the brass. But none of these are super crazy. I mean, this is the most, and it's 3.5 dB, so it's not super extreme. Probably, I'm guessing the identical EQ. Usually I just copy these over. Looks like I maybe add a little more 60 hertz just for a little more warmth in the brass. And then this one is just the extreme low end. I think originally I might have had this in when for a certain episode we had percussion overdubbed with the brass. So this was a suppressor for the Grand Casa bass drum rolls. But sometimes the low brass can get a little bit heavy, so it's kind of doing its thing here. But I'm guessing that's left over from a previous episode where I had percussion overdubbed with brass. Yeah. Reverb-wise, which I'll add in next, I have this Lexicon. So this is the third outboard Lexicon stereo engine that I'm using. It's another medium random hall. It's 1.9 seconds. These are all relatively short. Usually I'm over 2 seconds with most scores, but Cobra Kai is a little bit more of a sort of tight epic sound. Not tight epic, that doesn't make sense. A little more tight kind of a studio sound as opposed to a sort of grand film score a lot of times. At least the early seasons were when I first made those presets. If I wanted super long reverb, I do have like this symphony. I call it my dreamy Orc. It's 4.9 seconds, so that's quite. Sometimes I'll put this on horn solos or trumpet solos, or if you really want that, really long kind of dreamy verb, it's always there ready to go. But it's definitely not used on this cue. And then the same Altiverb Tadeo room, just to add some sort of space and dimension to things. Let's start adding some verbs in. Here's the Tadeo. Yeah, so just like the string one. And here's the Lexicon. Yeah, so definitely sounds much more like your typical kind of digital hall that you hear in a lot of scores. And yes, correct, these two are not used. The Stratus that I have in here, sometimes I'll use a shorter verb for brass, but often not. Well, actually, that's a longer verb. I don't actually know what this is here for. It's probably left over. This template has been carrying along with me ever since I started the show in 2017. Obviously, with changes made along the way. I don't think I've actually used that reverb in a Cobra Kai episode for many years. But there it is. A lot of times the templates just have reverbs there in case I want to use them. But yeah, let's check out this overdub and see what they decided to stripe in this cue. We'll turn these on. Oops. Oh, actually, sorry. First, let me just play that again with the bus EQs going on. So here's these added in. a little more clarity. Yeah, that Pro MB is not really doing anything. But yeah, the EQs are just, sort of clearing out the mid-range so that there's other elements that can come through and just kind of giving it a little more smooth hi-fi sound, which is really kind of, my style. Lots of beach balls tonight. Wow. Awesome. Okay, what did we overdub here? Probably some horn rips, I'm guessing. Yep. Which are actually doubling, I believe, the main brass pass. Yeah. And then here, just some low brass. Sorry. Trumpets. Kind of hard to see exactly what was firing on there. That's helpful just because trumpets sometimes can be too loud in the room. Trumpet players like to play as loud as possible, it seems like. So sometimes with these big lines, that's obviously the melody as well. So I think usually they're striping things that are the melody for me. So I have a little control over the melody versus low brass here. Oh, they actually double-tracked the trumpets. That's a rarity. But there you have that. Here we're back to horns. That's one of our big themes in Cobra Kai, so they double-tracked it just to get extra power out of the brass. So yeah, that's what's going on in the brass. Just 2 passes. Nothing super crazy going on there. Let's move on to orchestra percussion. So this is the last element that was recorded in Budapest with that orchestra. And just it's better for me to have percussion striped. It's a little bit easier to have some level control over them. Same thing going on the room mics and spots. These are, again, probably the identical EQs. You'll notice that I'm already using the legacy 80RS on the tree here just because this actually I used it almost, on even the second pass of brass. These take up a lot of DSP in the UAD card, so I'm limited on how many of the newer versions I have. I mean, yes, they sound better. They don't sound that much better that I'm, going to sacrifice other UAD plugins that I'd like to use just for these EQs versus the legacy version. But that's part of the gig with these big sessions is sort of managing, at least when you have UAD, managing your DSP and resources and things like that. But anyway, yeah, orchestral percussion, same room mic layout, and then they have 6 spot mics that I've labeled here, what I've discovered the instruments that are actually on them. This is very common in recording percussion for orchestra. Usually there's separate stations in the back, and the percussion players kind of move around. And we just put a variety of spot microphones over the percussion section that are just numbered, and then we'll move them around cue to cue often. This, I don't think they're necessarily doing that. I wasn't at this scoring session, so I'm not exactly sure. But oftentimes, yeah, we'll just take notes along, like, okay, mic 1 was snare, mic 2 was toms, mic 3 was tam-tam, so on and so forth. And, if we had to move them around, just so we don't have an unnecessary amount of microphones out on the floor. But oftentimes, too, we just leave them over a certain station, and one percussion player will kind of play a variety of instruments. We'll have a couple mics kind of over their station. Depends on what's going on, but that's why these are just perc 1 through 6, and then in the comments here, I've just labeled what they actually are. So here's some percussion. Yeah, so that's all the mics. Let's hear what it sounds like with some EQ. Not hugely different, just sort of a little more clarity in the mid-range. EQs, since I'm out of lexicons, because I think sometimes I was trying to use the second engine of my second outboard PCM 96 as a short verb. I'm using Symphony. This is my old percussion reverb. I've kept it in this template for consistency throughout the show. I've now started using cinematic rooms for percussion. I have a chamber in there that I like to use, but this is my old Perc Hall that I designed quite a while ago. It used to be my go-to template. It's still a great sounding reverb. Still love Symphony. Michael Carnes is a genius. So that's the hall that's on here, and then again Altiverb, the same Altiverb that's on the rest of the orchestra, to sort of put them in the same space and give them a little more size. So yeah, let's put some of that in. And it looks like at some point I had an LFE sound in here. I think I had that turned off. That really should be on Gran Casa over here, but I wasn't really using it too much. This is leftover. You know, when I'm doing surround mixing, I usually have my LFE channel generating from an aux send just like this. So this would be going directly to the subwoofer channel in a 5.1 or 7.1 or Dolby Atmos mix. But it's nice to sometimes have that extra oomph, that extra sort of extreme low end, just, you know, in a stereo mix like this. So sometimes I use it, sometimes I don't. Recently, I haven't been doing this quite as much just because it's so low. It often doesn't make a huge difference in a stereo setup unless you have pretty full-range monitors or speakers with a subwoofer. But yeah, there's sort of what's going on in the percussion. With the multi-track EQs, I already had it in there because there wasn't much going on. I didn't do any EQ there. Little bit of compression, but honestly, it's probably not doing too much right here. Let's see. Yeah, it's barely kissing it. Maybe the Gran Casas will... Yeah, a little compression going on when the rolls happen. Just to kind of smooth those out, but nothing too extreme. And then there's Pro MB. Yeah, this is the same one that was on the brass here. Exactly the same. So I'm guessing that's my... Looking at my sessions here, I think that's probably left over from... I remember one of the episodes early on in this season. For some reason, they recorded brass and perc together. So I had to sort of suppress that because I couldn't turn the Gran Casas down. They were just kind of eating up a lot of space in the room mics. But yeah, there's that there. That's already been on this whole time. It's not too extreme. So let's see what we did for overdubs. I'm guessing, I think, was there snares or something? I haven't mixed this cue in a while, so I'm trying to remember what it was. Let's see what this is. Yes. Yeah, so just so I can have some control over that. There's snares. Again, like these mics are probably not what they're labeled. This is Piatti. Looks like Gran Casa maybe had some activity going on. And timpani. Yeah, just sort of a stereo snare sound. You know, these are clearly the spot mics. One kind of in the middle that I didn't mix in quite as hot with the room mics. So yeah, there's the other pass of orchestra percussion. And then we did here, I did use the snare samples from Zach and Leo, an anvil sample, and then some tam-tam here, just for some extra zhuzh on that. So here's what the orchestral percussion samples sound like, and I'll slowly just add in my EQs and reverbs as we listen. Nothing super crazy, just, you know, bring up some mid-range. Nothing too extreme on these channels. You might be wondering why this is going back and forth between Pro Q2 and Pro Q3. A lot of these settings I've imported from a massive template I have that I've been building over all 6 seasons. Every time I get a new sound from Zach and Leo, I will import that track into my super prelay settings session is what I call it. So a lot of these settings are going back from, you know, God knows how many seasons before. And before Pro Q3 existed, I was using Pro Q2. So thankfully, Fab Filter was amazing enough to actually make a silicon native version of Pro Q2. A sort of, I mean, it's not discontinued because they still, well, you can't buy it anymore, but it's amazing that they gave me that because I was able to, I've recently upgraded my rigs to Mac Studios. And so I've had to go and stop using a few plugins, not too many, but a couple plugins I've had to replace with ones that are actually Apple Silicon native. And amazingly, Pro Q2, they've made a native version, so I can still recall old settings when I was using this EQ. So thank you, Fab Filter. That's awesome of you guys. Yeah, reverb is probably not doing a ton, but let's turn these back on and see what's happening. Yeah, so nothing super crazy. Let's see what this tam-tam's doing. Yeah, still extra roll. Was that even in here? Yeah, so they didn't record tam-tam, so I think we just added that in. So we have the tam-tam back. Here's everything all together with some of the samples going. Yeah, so it's all kind of blended together. You might have noticed the tam-tam I was using this 250 send here. So this is just an old EMT 250, a model of the very first digital reverb that ever existed. In real life, these things are massive. I mean, if there was one next to me here, it literally would probably be about that tall to the floor, and did have these really fun, huge levers on there. Kind of look like a droid to a lot of people. Capitol has one. I think Henson might have one. There's a few studios around town where I've actually used the real version. But this is just very long, 4.5 seconds, maximum pre-delay that this reverb can do. In surround, I like to use 2 of these, one in the front and then one panned in the surrounds. And the front channels, I'll just notch it down to 4 instead of 4.5, and the pre-delay to 40 milliseconds instead of 60. And then I do like to use the front and rear outputs here when I have 2 versions of this. So in surround, I'll just duplicate the channel. It'll have the same input, but different settings for the 2 different plugins, one pan to the front, one pan to the back. Kind of gives a nice, just giving a little more decay and a little more tail for, I use it on Piatti, tam-tams, cymbal rolls, things of that nature. Anything that I want kind of an extra long reverb on. So yeah, that constitutes the orchestral percussion. Let's move on to the sort of epic percussion. So lots of tracks going on here. I mean, nothing too insane. But this is sort of the underlying sort of action perc. Let's kind of go here where it's kind of really doing some stuff. Yeah, good karate battle percussion. So not probably a ton going on this stuff. If I turn these EQs on, yeah, mostly just filtering out extreme low end that I don't think I need, and then just little cuts here and there, mostly in the low mid, just because it can, you add this many channels of samples together, the low mids really could just start to build up. So even though individually, if I still at each one of these, they probably sound a little nicer with that low mid in there. When you start to add them all together and sort of layer them, you just kind of, sometimes I find it just kind of suppress that a little bit. And I like to try to do it before it hits reverbs and things like that. I guess I could do it more just on the sort of bus EQ up here. But that's what's going on there. Let's see, these are all, nothing too crazy. This is probably an old import from, what's this channel? Impact Low. Yeah, just an old, I used previously years ago as EQing a lot of pre-records with the 88RS, and then I started, when I discovered FabFilter, I started to use that. So that's why there's some random different EQs. It's just when I import settings from this old template, because Zach and Leo have continued to use sounds from previous seasons. So I'm getting, Impact Low is obviously a track that I had previously in a previous episode. So yeah, this is probably not going to be too extreme. Let me just turn these on and off as I play. Just a little brighter, a little clearer. Nothing super crazy. Bus EQ, I am doing a little extra low mid, sort of cleaning up, just because these big Qs with all these layers and elements sometimes can just get a little heavy in the low mids. So here's that. Just extra clarity. And then I do like to use this Pultec. I'm doing the Pultec trick, is what we call it on the low end. So this is a very, very old EQ, one of the first EQs, I believe, that ever existed. So the electronics are not perfect in there. They're very imprecise compared to, some of the EQs that we use today, some of the outboard gear that we use today. And you can see they didn't have a single knob, a single potentiometer to go from cuts to boosts. So they had 2 separate circuits for boosting and attenuating a single frequency. And they were not quite the same frequency, just because the electronics were slightly different between the two. They were just a little bit off. So if you actually were to analyze this and look at a oscilloscope of the output, the boost is just a little bit lower than, in this case, 60 cycles per second. That's what CPS is, or just 60 hertz. And the attenuation is a little bit above the frequency. So if you do both at the same time, they don't cancel each other out. They actually create this nice kind of little hump, this nice little like curve. Kind of boosting a little bit low and then a little bit above. It's kind of this nice, just sort of smoothness in the low end. So we call it the Pultec trick, the Pultec low end trick. It's kind of a common thing. Some people do it very extremely and get a kind of interesting comb filtery kind of low end sound. Can work cool on bass guitars, on kick drums, on different low end material. But I'm just doing a tiny bit of it here. just 1.5 dB in both directions. And then just 8 kilocycles, 8,000 hertz, 8K. Just a tiny bit of boost here, just for a little extra sort of sizzle on this perc. So let me bypass this and add this back in. And while I'm at it, we'll look at the SSL as well. I like the G compressor on percussion, drums, all sorts of things. It's a great one. So I'll turn that off, and then I'll play this and bring these in. So pretty subtle, but makes a difference. And percussion's not too extreme. Just sort of smoothing things out, just giving me a little bit of glue. And last but not least, the reverbs I should turn on as well. Using Altiverb here, I like the Fox scoring stage just to put the percussion in a slightly different space. I used to sometimes use Tadeo as well. I still do. This is a great percussion room to record percussion in. I mean, Tadeo was amazing as well for everything. But Fox is great for everything as well, including percussion. I think I actually got this EQ. Another composer gave me a Pro Tools session. They already were using it here, and I liked it a lot, so I just stole it and I started to use it. All mixers do that. We learn things from other people, and we just steal them and add them into our arsenal of tools that we use. So yeah, there's a little bit of that, and then the exact same Symphony EQ, my just go-to perc hall that I'm also using on the orchestral percussion. So yeah, let's add some verb. Oh, it looks like Epic hits here. At some point, for some reason, I put a plate on here. And most of the time, I think I've been moving that to the Symphony, just sort of the regular perc hall. In this queue, I didn't. Can't tell you why. I mixed this many months ago, so I can't remember exactly why I did everything. But yeah, let's add some reverb. Here's the room. All. So you get the idea. Epic Perc. Moving on to the Synth Perc stem. This is where, in this queue, because there's choir in this queue, which we'll get to very last, that goes on the wild stem here. Typically, the wild stem is where I put all of the reverses and whooshes and sort of transitional risers, things like that. But in this case, since I had choir and I wanted to make sure that was separate for the dub, I used the Synth Perc stem for all of these sort of riser things. So these are all the sort of just transitional long sweep, sub bass drop, riser, reverses, quite a few in this queue. So let's see where they're doing some more stuff kind of over here. Yeah, so all those kind of elements. Didn't do a ton on these. I won't spend too much time on these because they're nothing in super complicated. But just like the percussion, some of these are just filters. Looks like this I just didn't even do anything on. This is my default. I always have a filter just ready to go, just parked at 20 hertz. It's not going to really do anything down there. I'm just kind of chilling there. So that's how my EQs start. This one, I guess I just instantiated the EQ and decided not to do anything. But most of them maybe just have kind of similar, just maybe a little low mid cut or mid-range cut and a little bit of filtering. Then EQs, these are the same, Altiverb and Symphony. All the percussion EQs are the same. That's kind of typically what I do when I have multiple stems of the same thing, synths or guitars or percussion, things like that. All the EQs are the same. So I can move sounds between different stems as needed for stemming purposes, and the reverbs I can just reroute to the appropriate stems, Altiverb versus another one, and it'll be the same. And then the bus processing is virtually identical. It's the same bus processing there, the same settings. I guarantee you these are, looks like the makeup's a little bit different, but otherwise these are the same. So here I'll just turn everything on, and we'll hear some transitions. Oh, that's smooth. So there's the Synth Perc. And now for a certainly major Cobra Kai element, the drums. Same drummer Sam that we've had on every single season of Cobra Kai. He's a Cobra Kai legend. yeah, he recorded a single pass of kit on this. You will notice here, which we'll go into a little bit, there's some sections that had a very specific double kick drum pedal sample that Zach and Leo used, so I actually muted Sam's kick here. I think he didn't even intend to use his kick drum. He just kind of played along, just so because it was more natural, and they always intended to use this sample just because it had a certain thing going on. So that's why you see the kick drum mics muted here in a few sections. It's where we use this sort of kick-only sample. But anyway, otherwise it's a pretty typical sort of drum kit recording. Yeah, we'll go into the middle here where everything's kind of going on. Or that's just kick drum, isn't it? This is probably a more appropriate section to hear everything. So here's just the raw drum kit with no processing. I've disabled the bus processing here and any reverbs. So here's the raw sound. Sorry, 1 second. Here's just the drums without the samples that I've added. Yeah, so that's the raw sound. You know, Sam's does a pretty good job recording himself, though he does have a small room. It just doesn't have the massive kind of drum sound room we have in. So I do use some samples just to reinforce his kick and snare. The snare has some extra room stuff going on, which we'll get to, just so the snare has that just huge, slappy, sort of giant room sound that we like. Processing, a little more going on drums. If I turn this all on. So, you know, kicks have quite a bit of EQ going on. This is pretty typical. Most drum kits have a fair amount of EQ going on. And then some gating on things. Just sort of typical. I do like Pro G is a phenomenal gate. Has a great visual representation when you kind of play along here. So you can kind of hear there what the EQ is doing quite a bit. Toms, this is a new plugin I've actually discovered. So despite going over another Cobra Kai cue with you guys, there are some new things, including Smart Gate here, which has a sort of specific tom kick, snare, toms, hi-hat. They have all sorts of these sort of detection algorithms. And so normally what I used to do is I would go through and I would manually, like this, I would edit, you know, and mute around and kind of do this and manually edit every single tom hit. I got pretty quick at it, but it just kind of got a little tedious, and I kind of honestly just got sick of editing toms. So when I discovered that there were some smart gates that did this, this is the one that I discovered worked really well. And I think, assuming it's set right, it should be, yeah. So sometimes, like, you know, there wasn't a floor tom there, but it sort of still opened up there. It's sort of a set it and forget it kind of gate without having to worry too much about the threshold, because it's sort of trying to detect the sound of a tom-tom. So yeah, it's sort of called Smart Gate for a reason. But anyway, that's on there, which is a lot of fun. Toms, I do have a decent amount of EQ going on. All three are going on down here. Let's just listen to the toms. Yeah, as opposed to with no processing. So just a little flat, a little thick in the mid-range, especially in a big thick mix like this. I like to have toms that are a little punchier and a little, you know, kind of sucked out. I mean, I'm taking out quite a bit of mid-range, if I recall correctly. Yeah, that's a decent cut, and 800 hertz there and 570. And then they're slightly different for the others, but nothing crazy. And then I do like to set this low EQ on this 80RS is quite nice in high Q, and I just sort of sweep the low frequency until I find the fundamental of the drum and kind of turn that up. So I'm just kind of giving a little bit extra of sort of the fundamental of the tom. So you can see that those change significantly as we go up. Looks like the 2 rack toms I have the same kind of low EQ going on, and then more for the low guy here. This mono overhead, just like I cleaned up some low end here, filtered out some low end, filtered out a little bit of mid range, nothing too crazy. Similar thing going on the overheads, and then the room mic that Sam gives me, just kind of clean up some mid range here, and then use this 1176 just to squash the shit out of it. So let's see what that's doing. Yeah, it's pretty aggressive. That's the raw room mic. So yeah, Obviously, it sounds ridiculous on its own, but that's kind of a typical room mic swash, maybe more than some people do. I don't know. But that's what's going on there. Let me also add in the samples. So I'll keep playing this section and then slowly unmute these trigger samples. It's just Steven Slate trigger. Looks like I'm using Kick 10 Z1 on the kick. Snares, I have a couple options in here. I was unmuting certain of these between different cues, but in my template, I just got to have them there ready to go. This snare 5 Z1, and then the NRG room is turned up, because really what I want from this sample, Sam snare sounds good, but I just want that big giant room sound, and NRG is obviously a phenomenal drum room up in the valley. So yeah, and also the show takes place in the valley, so why not use a studio from the valley, right? Anyhow, here's that. So that's what the drums sound like there. Pretty raw, but just with the samples going on. Let's add in my reverb. So I'm using mostly just this AMS reverb and this Altiverb. So the Altiverb is just adding more room. I love this Clinton sound in Manhattan. It's just a phenomenal sounding drum room in Altiverb. So that's just adding some space. And then, it's Cobra Kai. It's 80s, 90s stuff. Got to have some RMX16 non-lin reverb, right? So this is on non-lin too. I'd made a couple of tweaks, but nothing super crazy. So yeah, I'll add these in as we play. Yeah, so looks like I already had the RMX16 going on the samples, but nothing super crazy. I didn't add a ton of reverb on the drums. I do have this channel here. It's called 140 for a plate, but obviously you can see here I have a 480L just kind of sitting there deactivated, because sometimes I need a longer reverb. Some cues we want a little more spacey drums and sort of more reverb on things, or some more epic sounds. So those are sitting there ready to go. And now let's explore. Actually, first before I do that, let's look at the bus, and then I'll show you the samples. So the bus, I don't think I'm doing a ton here. Yeah, just sometimes I think the cymbals were getting a little bit strident, a little bit tough on the ears. So I kind of suppressed some upper mid range here. Looks like it's around 4.5K, and then just clearing up some low mids, just so that things don't get built up between kick and toms. Same Pultec trick. It looks like this is almost the same settings as the low percussion, but even more of that kind of high boost. And then this thing does get a little more hit with drum kit, so a little bit more going on there. What I also have here, you might have noticed this drum crush bus is what I've labeled it. Literally everything's just going the exact same, I believe. Yeah, it's all just sort of unity, including the kick samples going here. And that goes into this parallel compression, or New York style compression is another way to put it. It's a distressor. It's set to nuke, I believe. It is. It's nuke. It's insanely compressed. But I just sort of blend this in. It just gives, especially in the full mix, it just kind of brings the drums out a little bit more without actually turning them up. Just adds a little bit of signal. So let me sample all of this a little bit. So there's without the parallel. Yeah, so it just adds a little more energy and excitement without actually raising the level too much. And then let me bring these EQs and compressors in. So actually, looks like I'm not actually doing... Yeah, my bus compressor is not going to hit too hard. Sometimes I'll drive into this more. I'll pull this threshold down, but in this case, I just left it where it was. As far as samples, looks like we have a lot of them going on here. So this is one of the places where they wanted to use their kick sample. So here's Sam without the samples. Yeah, so there's that kick sample. It just had a very specific sound that Zach and Leo wanted to keep. On the kicks, I was using this SPL Transient Designer. I have to be honest, I just guessed what my settings were here because I was using a non-Silicon native version, so when I opened the session up, it didn't recall. But if I recall correctly, I usually use this just to sort of turn sustain down and get a little more attack on things, so that the kick is just a little bit shorter. It's kind of a common thing I like to use this for. This is a phenomenal plugin. Love the Transient Designer. And then, yeah, I mean, bare like a tiny bit of low mid reduction, but didn't really do too much. Since Zach and Leo already really liked the sound of this kick sample. And then, yeah, there's some extra sort of electronic elements going on here as well. Let's hear what those sound like. Wow. Even with a brand new computer, Pro Tools still beach balls. Thanks, Pro Tools. Yeah, so not much processing going on there. Looks like I put a little bit of that room in there, just a little filtering. And these are just some sort of epic. That snare I did nothing to. It's just sort of a very specific sample that they added. So yeah, that covers everything with the drum kit. I'll maybe play another section here. This is some epic tom stuff going on with that kick sample. Here's what that sounds like. If I would just turn it all on, you know. Yeah, some fun tom work from Sam there with that double kick pedal kind of thing going on. So there's the drums. We shall move on now to the bass. Mostly this Umansky bass. He's been playing bass on a bunch of Cobra Kai action cues lately, so he was featured in this one. Here's what Umansky sounds like. Epic. So I left my modulation in there. I like to use this micro shift just to give bass a little bit of width, but mostly, as you can hear, the bass is still very much in the center. This kind of just gives it a little extra space and width without actually adding like reverb or something crazy to a bass. So there's that. This is a channel strip that I've had going on for many years. I like this Helios EQ. I should probably use it more in other things, actually. It is a nice sounding EQ. But it has just a little boost at 1.4, just to get a little bit more sort of grits and presence out of the bass. And then it looks like I'm just boosting a bit of 60 as well. Nothing crazy. Mostly just also like the color that this EQ adds. Clearing up some low mids, because oftentimes bass, like with a lot of this other stuff, common theme in Cobra Kai action cues, I'm cutting low mids with a lot of things just to kind of clear up those frequencies so they don't get too built up. And then my favorite Pultec EQ, Fairchild EQ. Yeah, let's hear what those sound like. So, fair amount of compression. I like basses pretty compressed and big sort of epic things here. Though he's playing the hardest here. I don't think the compressor hits as far like in this section. Yeah, still getting some squash there, but nothing too crazy. It's only a few dB. And then we have some synth basses going on as well. So let's see what those sound like. You know? I think that's technically a little bit of a mistake. This was called Diva Synth Bass, and I probably should have moved that to a different synth stem because it's not really a bass, is it? Was it a bass here? Ah, okay. Maybe not a total mistake. Sometimes I'm sure this is a Diva Synth Bass. For some reason, they decided to use the higher end of this patch. Normally, I probably would have maybe put that on a different stem just so it's separate, like Synth 1 is usually where my ARPs are. So it is married with the bass there. But the dub never complained because I guess they probably weren't playing with the stems too much in this. But that's what that's doing. Here's high bass. Very common Cobra Kai bass sound that's been in a lot of action cues. We have another variation of it down here. Nice big wide sound. I like that. And yeah, so just did a little EQ on those. That's basically it. I mean, the high bass too, I added some of that modulation as well. So the send's at 0 just to kind of at unity to get some more signal going on. And then I pulled the return back here, as you can see. Yeah, EQs, more just low mid softening. That's all I did on these three. They're almost identical, but pretty subtle. -3.5. Nothing insanely dramatic. So that's the basses. Let's look at guitars. So we have 2 stems of guitars. Whoops. Guitar 1 is our rhythm guitars, which I believe this is Mr. Robinson's guitars. We did not record this with our usual guitarist, Andrew Sinowak. Andrew did the lead guitars here, but Zach's rhythm guitars were good, so they decided to keep them. Just double track guitars here, hard pan left and right, kind of typical thing. Little EQ, little compression, little room. That's it. Here's what they sound like raw. Yeah, pretty solid sound. Looks like I added this 1084. It's kind of my go-to. 1081 is my go-to guitar EQ. It just has a few just fixed frequencies here on these couple of bands that it has. Instead of having too many options, it just I just find a mid-range cut I like. I clear up some low mids. And then kind of do a little bit of suppression on the upper mids here that can get a little bit strident, and then just a little more air. Though I do have this in the bell setting here instead of because guitars, you don't usually really need that super high sizzly stuff. It's just kind of the upper mids to get a little more brightness on things. Then I love this Kramer Pi on, it's kind of my go-to rhythm guitar compressor, sometimes solo guitars too. It looks like, the solo guitars here. Lead guitars also have the same thing going on. So let's, I'll play this and add these in. Just extra brightness, basically. In this case, it's hardly even hitting it. It's just getting a little extra level. Later on, maybe it hits it. Not really. Nope. In this case, the guitars weren't loud enough to ever hit that. Again, these are settings I imported from a template, and I didn't feel the need to, add a lot more compression, so I just kind of left it. Obviously, the output here is adding a fair amount, 6 dB, without any actual compression going on. Then let's add this room in. So, very subtle room. This just little whistle lured Studio One. It's a very small sounding room, but just gives a little bit of space. If I record guitars at a studio, I haven't done that in a very long time, sadly, but when I used to sometimes record guitars at studios, it is nice to put some room mics up in with the room that the amp's in. So I'm kind of mimicking like as if we had room mics on the amps. I think the Guitar 2 is maybe the same. No, I use cello. So for the leads, I have a little bit of a bigger room just to give a little, different space to those guitars. So you'll see I have that on some of these things here. Let's see what's going on in the Guitar 2. So here's these 3 lead guitars that Andrew played. So quite a bit of baked-in effects on there. So you can see I turned off all of the reverbs and delays that I normally would use. Just added the room. So we'll just start. Since we're talking about reverb, I'll just put that on there right away. Yeah, so bigger room, but still quite short. Similar EQs here. They're probably very close to the same settings. I mean, slightly different from the rhythm guitars going on there, and different, this is 690 instead of 560 was the cut I did in the other one. Then the Kramer Pis. I like to use S1. You can see these two are sort of a doubled, I think they're octave guitars. I think one's a lower octave, one's a higher octave, but they're playing together here. And they pretty much play together, as you can see here, throughout the entire cue. Let me move that out of the way. Oftentimes they are here. But I like to, I don't know, I could just actually take the panners and pan them, but, there's so many effects baked in here. I don't love the sound of taking a stereo effect track and kind of literally moving it over. Sometimes it's fine, but I feel like it just sort of isolates things too far on the other side. So I find this S1 using this rotation knob instead just kind of tilts things to one side. So in the mix, it sounds like they've been panned, but there's still effects and things kind of going on full stereo. It's just sort of tilted instead of actually using the panner. So for guitars, or if I want to do the same thing with like a couple of synths or something like that, or orchestral samples. I'll do the same thing occasionally. I kind of like to just use this plugin to sort of tilt things to one side or the other instead of using the panners. But sometimes use the panners, and again, there's no rules. But let's add this all in and see what it sounds like with my processing. Yeah, so a lot of mid-range cleanup. And these are actually getting compressed. But again, not too much. Nothing crazy. Let me show you actually what these two guitars sound like with and without the S1s. So right now they're kind of on top of each other. And now they're spread a little bit. But it doesn't sound like the effects got tilted to one side or the other. To me, it just sounds more like the dry guitars kind of just got pushed a little bit wider. So they cut through the mix a little bit better because they're not just, clouding up the middle. Sometimes I'll go 25 on these. These are set to 20 and 20, both directions. But sometimes I'll play with the asymmetry if it doesn't quite tilt things correctly. But I don't use a ton of Waves plugins anymore, but S1 is definitely one that I still enjoy using quite a bit. For these purposes. And I might have, let's see, did I automate it? I did. Okay, so this rotation, it looks like here he's playing a solo just by himself. There's no doubles or no octaves going on. And in that case, I didn't want one guitar just kind of over here with so much other stuff going on. So just moved to the center. But the rest of the cue looks like I just left it as it was. So that's the live guitars from Andrew Sinowak. Looks like this one electric guitar here, they wanted to keep the samples. Let's see what that's doing. Whoops. Yeah, so I'm assuming that's Zach. And he sounds great, so we kept it. So this one, I did add a little bit of this plate reverb. So let's hear what that sounds like. So a little space, but not too long. I think it's, how long is this? 1.5 seconds. Nothing super insane. And in this case, looks like I think I probably imported this from an old setting, just because it's Pro Q2. Some low mid reduction going on there, which is cool. And then this LA3A from UA. This is kind of my other go-to guitar compressor. I actually usually use the CLA3A quite a bit. I just like the sound of that one, though this UA one is great as well. Let's see what that's doing. Quite a bit of compression. And gain. And baked in delay, that wasn't from me. But yeah, some cool stuff there. This Tim H electric nylon, this has been a theme that's kind of been going on in the show. So there is a character who returns here. This is actually a brief snippet from another cue called Barcelona that was earlier in this season. So he did some pretty crazy stuff here. So here's what his guitars sound like. I'm just gonna throw everything on, and then we'll talk about what's going on there. Yeah, pretty fun. So yeah, these are my electric settings are similar. Camera Pi, and this 1081, kind of similar settings going on there. For the nylon, I just decided to use kind of regular guitar here. Obviously, you can hear that was very bright, and I even reduced some high end there because it was so bright. It's a DI'd nylon guitar. So yeah, it's quite bright. At least it sounds like a DI to me. I don't know that for sure. And I love this TLA 100 from Summit Audio. Softtube did the plug-in version of this great compressor. It's kind of my go-to. I honestly just use the acoustic guitar preset here and then kind of play with the gain and gain reduction. And then I usually add a little bit of saturation just to give it a little bit of warmth, a little character. And so that's what that sounds like on the nylon. That's dry or raw. And add some compression and EQ. Yeah, nothing super crazy, but that's what's going on with those guitars. Okay, that is the guitars, and now let's go over all of the synths. So I have 3 stems of synths and keys. Whoops, let's do Command F. That will do that. Not a ton, actually. This cue is, I would say, synth light for Cobra Kai. Sometimes I have a lot more tracks of pads and ARPs and things like that. This one was kind of more of a rock band and orchestra hybrid. But there's still some stuff going on, so let's see what's happening. Got some piano here. Kind of a Matrix Revolutions thing, which is fun. Just a different piano. That is a classic Cobra Kai sound. And then later here, this is another classic combo, grand piano and this gamelan sound. Oftentimes, this is also doubled with like 3 or 4 different other synths doing the similar kind of ARP thing, if this is what I think it is. Oh, it's a little bit different, actually. Yeah, so that's the keyboards that are going on in the cue. Not a ton. I mean, I use different reverbs for things here. Let's turn some of those on. Sometimes I use this Lex. This is 224. It sounds a lot shorter than it actually is. If I get it to display here. Yeah, it's set to 4.6, but it never sounds quite that long to me. Yeah, well, that's what that is. 250 on this one. Much shorter than the cymbal one. Yeah. And then some EQ going on, which I already had turned on. You know, this one just sort of clearing, brightening it up a little bit. That piano is kind of very heavy. But like most things in my mix template and my mixes, just a couple of mid-range cuts here and there and some filtering. That's usually mostly what I do on the majority of tracks. This is when I just filtered it. And yes, that's the keys. So we have one ARP. It's amazing. Usually there's a lot. This is only one. Just doubling that piano. Some EQ. Actually, I did do an EQ. Just left it. That's something that takes a long time to learn as a mixer. When you're going through things, just to say, that sounds fine. I'm not going to do anything to it. Especially when I'm going through lots of tracks like this. Sometimes I'll just, if it sounds good enough in isolation, it's not something I think it's going to be an issue with low mids or anything like that, I'll just leave it. I might come back to it and be like, oh, now that I hear the whole mix, I need to sort of carve out some there. But a lot of times I just move on. It sounds fine. It's done. No reason for me to reinvent the wheel with a lot of this stuff. So yeah, got some pads going on here. I use the same reverb on all of these. This Valhalla Vintage Verb. It's kind of my long pad reverb that I used to use. I used to use 2 of these in surround as well, but now I'm using cinematic rooms for my surround synth verbs. Again, a lot of this template is kind of legacy stuff that I did years ago that I've just kind of kept because I wanted consistency from episode to episode for this show. But as with everything, a little bit of EQ, a little bit of mid-range cuts, some filtering. It's kind of all that's going on here. So we'll play it here where there's actually all 4 tracks kind of doing stuff. Add some verb. Yeah, just some extra tension layers. Nothing super crazy. And last but not least, we do have live choir in this cue. Some pretty epic stuff going on. They double-tracked this in Budapest. I think it was the exact same ensemble, just recorded twice for extra size. So what I do when I have double-track choir sometimes, as you can see here, on the second pass, I reverse panned everything. So all the room mics are reverse panned, all the spot mics are reverse panned. So you kind of get this like stereo double-tracked choir kind of thing, because in a big cue like this, choir is just yet another element out of a ton of other things. So just kind of having this wide sort of double-tracked choir is kind of fun, especially if they have the sopranos all the way on the left, which is a typical way to set up, SATV. If you double track it and then you kind of have everyone kind of mirroring themselves on the other side, you get this kind of big wide choir sound. Obviously not appropriate for more traditional things or more classical kind of sounding things, but for a big action sort of hybrid cue like this, it can work really well. So this one, I think I was even running out of more UAD resources. So my native go-to plugin for sort of Neve EQ is this BX console, BX console N. It's not a Neve VR, I've been told. It's sort of a special Neve that Brainworks had. in their studio that they used, but it is the closest thing I have natively to the 88RS. So when I'm trying to replace that plugin when I'm running out of UAD resources, this is what I use. I guess in this queue, I think this came from a template where I had a lot of other passes. I know some queues in Cobra Kai have had maybe up to 6 overdubs of choir, so that really ate up a lot of UAD. Because if I look here on my meter, which is in my second monitor, I'm at 95%. So yeah, I don't think I really would be able to. Yeah, because we have 2, 4, 6, 8. I have this is like 24 channels of 80RS. Even the old legacy one, I think, would sort of kill my UAD. And I, like I said, I have 2 cards in here. How do you look at that? Yeah, there's 2 octo cards going on in this rig. Yeah. So anyway, same kind of setup. I think they're actually they're almost the identical room mics that Budapest used for the rest of the orchestra. So let's just hear what the room mics sound like. So pretty distant, but a nice choir room sound. Not too terrible. Here's these mid mics. I actually don't know where these are. They never sent me a setup sheet, but I assume they're kind of halfway between, the tree and the outriggers and the ensemble. Much closer. And then we have spot mics here. For some reason, they only called them 1 through 4. I'm not sure why they're not labeled SATB, but I assumed they were SATB just by nature. So that's our sort of closest perspective, and here's all the microphones with the balance that I decided to use. Now for me, that's still, choirs often do sound very mid-range, kind of very muffled like this. So I think on this I probably did a fair amount of mid-range EQ. The spot mics I just filtered. I think I maybe open up the filter and the basses a little bit. But basses actually don't usually, unless you're doing super, super low stuff, they don't get too much below 100 hertz, depending on what kind of the style is. Not sure where that expander's going up. I don't have it turned on. Interesting. Yeah, so here's what the EQ is. Looks like, some mid-range cuts. I'll just activate these as I'm playing back. A little clearer. Let's add in the overdub. Turn on the EQs as well. So not a massive difference, but definitely adds more size and just, doubles the size of the choir is the idea. And then, I'm just going into this choir sub, this sort of sub bus going on here. I've added quite a bit of high end here, cut some mid-range. I mean, you could go a lot, more extreme in this EQ, but that's a decent amount of 12K, just for some sort of, high end sizzle. Not too much else. Did a little extra filtering just in case here at 70. Quite a bit of EQ here. I think sometimes when the choir got really loud, they just got really, really sort of oppressive in the upper mids. So I did do some pretty extreme EQ here that was in my template. And then at a certain point, I think season 5 or 4, Leo really wanted the choir compressed. He was like, I want this epic compressed action choir. So I imported this from one of those cues. I think they wanted me to recall this. This Neve is just kind of really, making things super epic and sort of tight. It is a very loud cue, so the compression on the choir was kind of needed. I don't usually compress orchestra or choir, but sometimes with a more hybrid sort of action cue, it's called for. But I'll slowly add these in as I play back here. Let me is there a longer section? No, this is probably the best one. Let me just add these in and hear what those sound like. it's a pretty processed sound. I think that doesn't sound phenomenal on its own, but I think in the mix they were just getting really sort of very loud and strident there. Maybe cut a little bit too much high mids there now that I hear this back, but in the mix it worked fine. So there's the choir. I do have a couple other things on since they were just barely overlapping. Usually any of the solo elements, when there's no choir, I kind of put them on this wild stem. Oftentimes I have two miscellaneous stems going on and not just this one wild stem, so that I can kind of have, choirs separate from different things. But in this case, they were just not overlapping enough that I did put these on here. So I have this pipe sound here. Literally just bagpipes. And it looks like I'm using my Valhalla room that I have in the choir. Oh, just going back to choir, I forgot to put reverb on. Here's what the reverb sound like on the choir. So the sound is said Valhalla, but I've actually started using this new plugin version of the TC6000. So I used to use this TC6000 outboard reverb at a studio I used to work at. It was my go-to choir reverb, which I think I stole from Sean Murphy. I think I assisted Sean Murphy on a mix. He had used this on choir, so I did the same thing. I actually, when I got this plugin a few months ago, I can't remember exactly what engine I used. I know at that studio I just had a preset that I had made, and I just always used that, maybe change the RT a little bit. But Church made sense. So actually, now that I'm hearing the choir, that EQ makes a lot more sense with the reverb added. The reverb, I think, just added a lot of brightness, which is why I kind of had that wacky EQ on the choir, because it sounds fine here. And in the mix, I'm happy with the way the choir sounds. Maybe a little bit extreme EQ. I don't know. That's part of mixing. You never know sometimes if what you did is is the best way. It just is what it is. And then the Altiverb, I probably this is just a great hall. So just a little room on the choir. This is kind of a medium sized room. A lot of times I'll use this Uranienborg, which is a church in Oslo, Norway, which I'm actually about to go to, which is fun. I hope to kind of see this church. Notre Dame is kind of a go-to that a lot of people use for an Altiverb choir reverb, but I just like the tone of Uranienborg more. I think it's just a more even sort of sounding church reverb, but I didn't use it in this one. I think I just decided I didn't need for this big action cue, this sort of epic. It's very, very long. It's like 8 to 10 seconds. So I just kept my sort of Alair setting going on here, so we'll just leave that at that. Last but not least, we have some shakuhachi. Because it's Cobra Kai, it's karate, you gotta have some shakuhachi. Yeah, a little stinger there, add some verb, little EQ. Yeah, nothing crazy. So that's the whole cue. That's everything that's going on in there. As far as sort of the final touches on things, if we just look at my master faders here, this is where all my bus processing is going on. Typically, in my second Pro Tools rig over here, which is where I record stems, they all go through my Avid Matrix, which is using the Dadman software is how I route everything. So, I have 128 channels going from this rig over into this rig. Hi, Tessa. My dog just came in. I usually put these A800 Studio plugins on this side because I have another Octo card in this rig, and when I'm in 5.1 or 7.1, usually it's kind of needed to take those resources over there because I do take up a lot of DSP resources. But I remember early on in Cobra Kai, I was changing them a lot. Some cues I wanted the 456 tape, some the GP9, because we wanted sort of different colors, different cues. I haven't touched them much in later seasons, but that's why they're in this rig and not in the print rig where I normally have them. And then I have limiters in here as well, just for this cue only, I believe, is where I put these limiters because stuff was just getting so loud that it was overloading the actual buses here before they went through the Dadman over to here. But yeah, this is just I think it's still 456. GP9 is my go-to, but early Cobra Kai seasons, we did kind of want to give it a little bit of the flavor of the Bill Conti scores, which I think this just sounded a little bit more vintagey to me, whereas the GP9 is very sort of hi-fi. So yeah, if I just sort of sample a little middle bit of the mix, I'll turn these on and off and see what they're doing. They're pretty subtle, but they add, I don't know, just everything sounds nicer to me. So there's a bit of a level difference there because of the way I have the inputs and outputs trimmed. But tonally, it's not massively different, but it just does something nice to the mid-range. The low end gets a little bit extra warmth, which I think is sometimes why I need to cut a little bit more low mids than maybe normal, because the tape saturation adds a little bit of warmth that I have to kind of contain. And just some smoothness in the high end. I don't know. It's pretty subtle, but it's kind of been part of my sound for a while. And yeah, then some limiters, and that's sort of the main sort of master processing that is on all of the stems. If we switch over to screen sharing this rig to the left of me here, this is the print rig. So these are the stems for this cue. They're on the second set of tracks. Everything is in a A/B roll here. So when I print cues, it's all in one single session here. And yeah, I can have everything printed together, and when I'm done with an episode, I send this session to the music editor, and it's already kind of put together for them, which saves them some time. But everything comes into these buses from the other rig. If I were to look at my I/O here, the inputs here, these are all the stems that are coming over DigiLink through my Avid Matrix back here. So yeah, they just all come in here to these sets of buses, and since I have limiting going on in the other rig, I didn't actually add any limiting here. Sorry, I do. Sorry, there's one more set of limiting. I actually have a separate set of outputs. This is kind of something a little more unique. On my main rig here, I have these edit sort of bus paths. Because I have so many channels, this helps me a lot, because sometimes Zach and Leo will send me stems that are edited from mixes that I've already done. And since I have EQs and compressors and things like that on the master faders of the outputs for the main stems here, I don't want to double those up. So when they give me, an edit of strings or brass or guitars or what have you, if I were to send them through these same outputs, it probably would sound kind of funny because they're getting the exact same EQ and compression all over again. It'd just be too processed. So I just made a separate set of paths here that have no processing whatsoever on them, because the edits, they're already limited, they're already processed. They don't really need anything. They just need to be summed together with the new mix. So I have that path going on there, and they come into another set of aux tracks here on the print rig. And they sum together to sort of these sort of main master buses here, which are the main buses that get some limiting. And that's what goes into the inputs here of these record tracks. And then, as you can see here, I only record onto the blue tracks here. I record this up here, and then I just drag the audio down. But everything sums together to a stereo mix, and the stereo mix in my world just has a limiter. The output set to -1, true peak. That's it. I don't do any stereo mix processing, because the stems are really what's going to be used at the dub stage. So if I had an EQ or something on the stereo mix, it would be influencing my mix decisions in ways that wouldn't be affected in the stems, and then it just wouldn't sound right when they use the stems on the stage. And that goes over here to print on the stereo mix. And then I'm also printing click. I print the dialogue as a dialogue slug is what I call it. This is literally just the dialogue being printed from the rough dialogue track that I have, just for, if there's a conform that happens, the music editor can quickly just put this track up against and kind of quickly see where the dialogue moved significantly. They kind of can help see where the edits need to be made, at least to get the major pieces in place, and then they have to do their thing to make it actually musical. But yeah, that's the whole process. Let me play back this against the reference mix like I always do. And we can hear the reference mix that, this is a little bit unfair, because the ref mix only has their samples. It doesn't have any of the live elements in there. But here is Karate War final mix. So there you have it. That is Karate War from episode 610 of Cobra Kai. This is from the second block of episodes for the season 6. The first 5 came out several months ago. These are out today, as well as the soundtrack. So please go watch Cobra Kai. There are 5 more final episodes coming next year, which will wrap up this entire series. We're very sad to see it go, but it's been a great run, and it's been so much fun mixing for Zach and Leo. I hope you enjoyed this. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed it, and I'll see you on the next one. Thanks. Bye-bye.